Construction loans made easy.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. Glad to be here. Thank you for asking.
Well, we're going to talk about luxury remodels. You do all sorts of construction, but one of the areas that you really do specialize in is luxury remodels. So maybe we just start there and just kind of, what's a kind of a basic definition you think of a luxury remodel?
Well, that's a good question because that means different from every client. When someone comes in and asks for something, you have to kind of take a look around and look at their surroundings and think, all right, what they may be looking for better than what they already have. And that may be completely different than someone who already has a 7,000 square foot and is looking for something different. So generally that is, to me, that would be something that's not necessarily off the shelf, off the rack, something that is a little bit more unique. Our clients are generally something that have, someone that has been more established, they've worked for a little while, and they're looking for something that not everybody else has. And it's a little bit more unique kind of space, a little more customized to their lifestyle.
So I would imagine it's a lot of clients that maybe thought about maybe doing a little bit of the work themselves. They've gone to Home Depot and they've seen some of the standard stuff, and they just want something a little bit more.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, the funny thing about it is most of us grew up in these standardized box houses, anywhere from California to New York to New Jersey to Florida. They were all mass produced in anywhere from 50s to 60s to 70s. And so that's truly the kind of the neat thing is to say, you can have 4 or 5 houses in the same block that are all pretty much the same, but that's the thing is how can you find something unique and something a little bit more luxurious and better than just something that you might be able to walk in and buy, something from, like you say, Menards or Home Depot that's off the rack, and how can I make it specifically customized for those type of clients, and something different that you're not going to see in every photograph as well.
Are there certain parts of a remodel that tend to be I guess more of a focus for clients when you think about high-end remodel? Is it the kitchen? Is it cabinets? What are some of those things that tend to people spend a little bit more on some of the luxury remodel stuff?
Yeah, generally that has to be kitchen. One, because there's so many things involved with it. There's the appliances, there's the cabinetry, there's the lighting, but we also spend good 50% of our time there. And now, especially since more COVID, we're getting people that are more working from home. I mean, figure back in, before pre-COVID, and when it was difficult to try and convince your boss, hey, I can work just as effectively at home. Now, 80% of the people, I mean, we've got clients that I'd say on the average, at least 50% of them, one of them works from home, if not both. And so that's a completely different dynamic, and their needs may be something from a full room to a little desk, and that depends. And so each of these things are, once again, depending on how much space they may have and how much noise they may make, and it may need to be in a space different. I mean, we've got one project that we did up in Glencoe that, this guy is working with millions of dollars in companies and that he's working with, but yet, his wife would be walking by with the kids using the commode next door. He's like, Michael, I can't be doing this, and I got to work at home. So we built one kind of a little bridge away from the house, and he's up high in the loft, so he has his own privacy and things that he can do what he needs to do, but yet he can walk down some stairs and say, hey babe, how was lunch done? And he's working from home. So these are type of unique situations that have evolved substantially and over the past 2, 3, 4 years. And
I would, remodel, of course, for you certainly includes additions as well, adding space. So do you see a lot of you mentioned a lot of people working from home, a lot of homes that they want a second office space so they can have those separate spaces. So the kids aren't walking by while they're on their
right. Yeah, now more than ever. And the nice thing about custom building is it gives you the opportunity, whether you're building, a brand new house, it gives you the opportunity to try and plan that. We've got one client that we're actually in the financing part of it and finishing, say, well, we've got 2 families that are coming together, each with 3 kids, and they're both on second marriages. And that is more common now than obviously used to be in the 50s and 60s, but yet this house was built in the 60s. So how do you take that situation and retrofit that within common days and things? And those are so many numerous, and then at the same time, try and make it different than it looks like the different of the other parts of the houses around the neighborhood and things like that. And then, of course, there's the uniqueness of the client. And that's the real beauty of what we can do, is try and say, all right, how do we take the soul of what the house is? The spirit of how this house was originally built, back in, there's 50 of them down the street. One's blue, one's green, and how can we take this one and make it much more unique and customized because of the people and the situation that are living there. And that's the real beauty of these type of more custom or luxury type of things, that it's not just a 20 by 16 room off the back. You literally start from the house, basically say, all right, if I was the original architect back in this day in 1950, and I had these clients and this was my formula, what would I do? How would I work in, and you try and find that rhythm of the house, the soul of the house, and try and integrate those. And so that later on, it doesn't look like somebody just put a hat on top of the house. It was integrated so that the house literally has finally grown. 60 years later, they finally finished it, so to speak, that kind of thing.
And that was one of the questions I had, because you mentioned you didn't use the term tract house, but a lot of what you described are neighborhoods that are built by one builder, 3 to 5 to 6 different models, and 30 years later, you're now going in for this remodel. How do you integrate luxury remodel with maybe some of the areas of the home that aren't luxury, because in most cases you're not going to do a full gut rehab, and certainly you do some of those, I'm sure. But or maybe does that just mean that's when the project becomes bigger and bigger as the clients see the differences between maybe the initial thought of what will be remodeled with what will be left and unremodeled?
Yeah. That's a broad question, that's like numerous answers. I mean, the funny thing is that nowadays, especially, and this kind of rolls into something we were talking about a little bit before, where now we can take a house that was, maybe worth 300,000 or 400,000 or 6 or 7, depends on the neighborhood. And it's like every other house in there. And one of the things that we find is that depending upon the uniqueness and the ability to take and create this. Now I've taken this standard 3-bedroom house that literally is compromised price-wise because it's the same as everything else. So therefore you're dictated price-wise by everything else. But now I can take this, bring it up to new standards, and now has more bedrooms, it has more bath. Realistically, if God forbid they decided to get a promotion and move to DC, which happens, now we have a house that is easy to sell in a day or so, and that's happened. Where clients come back and say, man, we have sold our house. We made, not only did we love living there for 5 years, but we made money on the house because we brought it up to standards, and that's where, like, you guys can come in. We say, hey, we can lend them the funds to be able to do that so they can do more of what they would really like versus, hey, I got $300,000 cash. Well, today that's not going to get you much, so, but if we can go and borrow against the house and try and create something a little bit better for them in the long run, versus waiting later when it's going to be even more expensive later to tie it in. We do it all at the same time, and it ends up costing them less, and they get to live in it longer. It's a win-win for everybody.
100%.
That answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And really, for better or for worse, the client's budget certainly dictates a lot of what can be done, and even more as the mortgage guy. If they are financing it, then it can be even more important because that appraisal, that all important appraisal, may dictate what they can finance. So when you think about when you're approaching a client that is going to be financing it cash versus looking at the financing it with a mortgage, knowing that an appraisal is going to be an important aspect. How much conversation goes around that? Do you start with that wish list and then say, okay, based on the number where you're at, we got to think about the appraisal you might get and what you may need. Tell me a little bit about that process.
Well, to some extent, guidance counselors, you're as a finance guidance, you say, here's the best way to spend your money. As the planners and designers, we have to look forward and say, hey, you're going to be in this house, 3 years? You're going to be in this house 10 years? You're going to be on this 20 years. What's the best guidance that I can give you as far as how to expand your lifestyle into these homes? And that's the uniqueness about what we can, to be able to do. And so, once all right, these are some of the guidance, how much you might be able to put into it. I think ultimately it's the end result of what the house, you want to give them the best financial result of what the house would be anyways, long term, to be able to plan ahead and try and design around that. So we've had a lot of clients that have come to us and say, hey, we can't do all of this right now, but we want to plan in advance for it. And so therefore we can create the space. They can only do some of it. Generally, they'll actually end up finishing it because it's like, all right, once we're half done, do you want to really go through this again? So, but at least they know in their mind, hey, how can this whole thing work out and be integrated and together so that it does, and that's the thing, so that it does all work together, it does all integrated, so you're not have rooms in the wrong spots and things like that. And so, one of the big differences between some of the basic pieces and more of a luxurious type of a space then becomes the amount that you can do. I can open up walls. I can have, beams and posts and turn those into architectural details and things like that, and as well have the craftsman with the ability to be able to do those kinds of things. Because one thing is, it's anybody to some extent can say, hey, I can do this and open it up. But the other hand, to be able to take those ideas and dreams, turn those into drawings enough to be able to give to a guy who's got the enthusiasm and the artistic just as much as those of us in the design standpoint, to now take that, whether it's a plumbing pipe or an electrical pipe or whatever, to turn that into the actual reality, because very few of us contractors are out there hammering ourselves. So that's the whole other side of this, is that we need the crews and these guys to be able to actually do all the things that we want them to be able to do.
The first part of your answer reminded me of a topic that does come up every once in a while from clients, is the concept of phasing. So sometimes I'll hear clients will come in and whether maybe they feel financially constrained by doing everything they want at once, or sometimes they want to stay in the home. So if they phase it, maybe they can do that. So, phasing, let's say a client wants to do, just do 10 things, but they maybe stage one, they'll do 5, and stage 2, they'll do the other 5. When a client comes to you with thoughts and questions about that, how do you approach that? What are some of the advice that you give them?
Space planning, you kind of have to say to them, all right, and first, probably the best thing to do is you could kind of sit down with somebody and say, all right, let's imagine, you're not in this house. You're in an imaginary house, sitting in a dark room with just your mind. All right. And I have these spaces. I want to be able to have a kitchen. I want to be able to have an eating area and stuff. And then one of the things I try and tell my clients is, let's break the barrier of rooms, living room, dining room. Think of these as activities. These are energies, activities through these kitchen eating areas. I'm now eating, I'm kitchening, I'm breakfasting, that more kind of says more of an energy, of an activity versus just 4 walls, So then it's about the relationship between those spaces, So once we can begin to understand the things that they're looking for and how these things can start to basically connect and intertwine, then we can see how we can integrate that into the house. And it's funny how a lot of times, you don't see any integration. Then once you start to establish it with the views and the light and things, it just kind of comes together. So I think the clients, they'll kind of tell you, depending on where it is or how, if you just kind of sit and listen, kind of look around, they obviously picked that original house or wherever they're living in now for a reason, the views, the sights, and they'll tell you, hey, this is what we liked about it. And if you see that, then you can, we did one in Park Ridge where, as I was doing the measuring, I'm seeing him upstairs in his office, small little office, and she's out back in the balcony, in the deck, So I thought, all right, those are obviously 2 places that they love about this house, the backyard, and those kind of things. And his office, we were redoing and stuff. So those things that, these are these unique spaces, that you can create for the people, because they're going to be there for, forever, essentially. That's one of the greatest things about what we do, is that once it's done and it's built and it's there forever. Unless somebody comes in 100 years from now, 50 years from now, and tears it down, it's there. So that's the unique thing about what, these kind of custom work, is that you want to try and make, as artists, our space as unique and artistic as we can,
And hearing you talk about, those scenarios, you do your own design work as opposed to the client going to an architect first and then coming to you. How important is it for what you do to be able to do your own design work?
It's basically, I kind of tell our clients, hey, we don't really build anything we don't design. We don't really design anything we don't build, because, at some point, if somebody, a client has sat down, a family, and they poured their soul out to this architect, and he's heard every one of those things, and now he's tried to put those into a set of plans as best she, I don't want to be, put, and then now that has to translate to me, and I have to try and figure out a way to build it, which I can, once I understand, and but versus sitting down with them and watching. And, sometimes it's funny because he'll, want to be, sometimes you get clients that'll be in 100% unison. The other time you say, man, every time I pick white, she'll pick black. Doesn't matter. But so that's my job, is to try and be the filter in between and put those things together and make some unison out of it, And then once we put that together, then, structural engineer, mechanical engineer, I mean, nobody does any one thing themselves, unless you're the wild man on the reality series, building a cabin, cutting his own trees and stuff. It's all a series of groups of these people. The finance guy, the bank guy, the permit guy, the carpenter, the plumber. And getting this proper coordination together. That's the real beauty of it.
And then as you kind of go through the budgeting process, you've got the wish list. You can come up with that budget. Value engineering, is the term that a lot of people will use.
I think that's right.
Quite often I do an initial conversation with the clients when they have these dreams of doing a project, and it's basically a construction loan 101 conversation, how they work. And somebody could have owned 10 homes, but in most cases when I'm speaking with a client, it's the first time they've done a construction loan. So it's really working with these really smart, affluent first-time home buyers, really, to an extent. So then I say, okay, well, we're going to go out. We're going to, find our builder, our contractor, get a budget, and very rarely do they ever come back 60 days later and say, well, I got to tell you, the budget came in less than we expected. So they get the budget, and invariably it's higher than what they thought. And because as consumers, we don't know what stuff costs, right? But somehow we have a number in our mind on what it should cost, and it comes in more. What are some of the things you look at when you look at some of that value engineering stuff? Going from that wish list and the full budget to some of the things to pull back on.
I think probably the simplest, the way to value engineer is try and be, like I said, from somebody to recommend, try and customize as little as you can. Because anytime you have to customize something, it means you're breaking it out of the assembly line. Very few, even our $2, $3, $4 million houses may not have everything custom made by hand, the cabinets and stuff, so even some of the kids' vanities or whatever, we may want to try and simplify those kind of things. They're going to beat the crap out of them anyways. Why spend $3,000 for custom made vanity? It just doesn't make sense. So those kind of things you can itemize as much as you can and try and lead some people in the right direction. Some other people may say, you know what, I don't want anything cheap in my house. Doesn't matter. So each one depends on what they're really looking for. You can type, and there may value engineering might be using hand-painted walls instead of wallpaper, whatever the case may be, So that's to say, each client, as you're talking to them, you'll get a handle on what they're thinking about is important or not, whether it's custom, or stay chrome, faucets, things like that, And see, that's what's interesting when you go back, and especially a lot of guys that may do a lot of higher end remodeling, you go to these houses that were built very, very well in the 1950s, 1960s. And you go there and you see this Kohler faucet that's still just as good as it was when the day it was installed, and those kind of things. And so that's where you can say, yeah, you can put something in, but later on you're going to have more problems and blah. Value engineering that way. In the long run, you're saving money by using, but it doesn't have to be the absolute best faucet. Just get a really good, well-made one, those kinds of things, and use good plumbers, good electricians, those kind of things, because they'll save you in the long run.
Sure. Times change, design elements change, people's tastes change. Are there any sort of design elements or custom features that people are bringing up more and more these days?
Well, yeah, one of them was home office. We kind of touched on before, and that's even becoming more and more. It's funny, we did a house about a year or so before COVID. And part of it was they had an old detached garage that we tore down, made a connection to the house, and then involved a laundry room, mud room, and a little storage room that later on, the more it developed into an office for her. And then later on, a couple years later, we came back and did the kitchen. She called me up after it was all over. She said, by the way, I have no idea how that little office saved our marriage by having him not have to work in the dining room while he was having, even if it was small, it's like a large closet. Some people gave him a space to call his own, So those are the things that I see. One is even more, obviously now, but as well as we're doing more is second floor kind of loft area family rooms kind of things, because if the kids, to me, I want to promote. I mean, the thing is, as designers, we are controlling in a way everything that is going on in that house. I mean, it's, when you think about just by the positioning of the bedrooms, I mean, if I've got a family with twin boys, I better make darn sure that those bedrooms are the exact same size. Those a couple inches bigger, that could be a food that those guys will settle for years to come. How come you got the one with the 2 bedrooms and the 2 windows? You don't think about these things, but that matters. You think about when you were a kid, your sister, so what we try and do is create these spaces. And now that everybody's, kids got cell phones, they're in their own zones. So if I can create something a little bit more on the second floor, more of a mini family room kind of thing. Maybe there's a TV mounted on the wall so they're not necessarily watching TV, but they're all in this group area. And it could be a little bit more less informal, messy or something because it's not down by the family room in the main floor. These are luxurious items because not everybody has 300, 400, 500 square feet on the second floor they can devote to an open space for the kids. But when you think about how that can promote togetherness throughout the house, because usually once you go upstairs, you're gone. There's and that's private space, public space, kitchening, breakfasting, and those kind of things, So if we can create a public private space for the family, especially if I can get a little balcony off of it or something like that, those are cool little spaces. In my mind, luxury is things that I've always wanted, but never able to get. And now I can do them. So that's kind of the little things about how you can define luxury,
There's some things maybe off most consumers or clients' radar that might be a little underrated, or again, not on the radar that you might bring up to clients to consider?
Yeah, it's funny that I personally like stucco. I think it's a beautiful medium, as an artist, if he paints or something, it's a beautiful material that a lot of people are afraid of because back in the 80s and stuff, there's all the Florida with the, insulation system and the problems, but this is completely different. Real stucco is a concrete cement based type of material, but it has some fluidity as an artist that brick or something like that may not, and so there's, the nice thing is to be able to take a little bit of a brick or a stone and a stucco and try and integrate those things simply. You don't want to get too wacko with it, but it's a nice medium that allows you to kind of have some fun with, we'll say.
And it gives a little bit of a contrast to the exterior for clients as well.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because that's the beauty of it. I learned many, many years ago, one of the architectural schools down in Florida, is that the professor said you have to think of architecture like music. You get the violin, you get the flute, you get the horns, you get the drums, you get these big, the little. There's variance, and if you can get that same variance in space, so if we can do that with tight spaces, big open spaces, and things like that, if we can do that, then you get the same always type of musical type of atmosphere.
And I guess I could have started this at the beginning, but just very briefly, kind of what's a little bit of your process, just in terms of when you're first having that first conversation with the client to when it all comes together.
Well, we break pretty much most projects into the 3 phases essentially. The first is schematic design. That's where you first, and that's the fun part, to some extent. I mean, obviously it's beautiful, and to see the construction come to a fruition. I was out there this morning walking on the second floor, and this is 7 months after the initial design, and finally out there watching the guys build the second floor walls, and that's one of the projects that you and I worked on together down south. But is to hear them, the first meeting, to sit down and say, all right, this is what do you want, and as both of them or one of them will explain. Sometimes the wife will just come right out, sometimes the husband, or they'll do it type together. You kind of watch how they interact together, and they describe what their dream is, because they're pouring their soul into you to some extent about what they may want, so and I take that just so serious, because this is something that's, like I said, is going to be there for a very, very long time, so once you kind of get an idea of truly what they're looking for, then you can go back and you can start to try and piece the thing together. Either you design the house, or you try and take site measurements of the existing house, and start to try and see what the rhythm and how you can integrate it to what they're thinking. Whether somebody's trying to expand their house or design new, it's similar in approach, but you basically have to kind of sit down and kind of take those eyes and basically it's at some point shut everything out and let's sit down and stare at a blank sheet of paper and say, all right, God, bring me the design, you know? So then once you get to that point, then you can start to say, all right, now once I have an idea, then I can say, all right, I need this much carpentry, I need da, 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 da. Then you can take that and break that apart and say, all right, now we have a project, now I can have a price. But I can't even begin before. I mean, say construction can range $100 a foot to $300 a foot. Who knows? Depends on what's involved with it, you know? So you can kind of get a range of what's involved based on experience. And then you can say, all right, then once, because I found that if we design by price, you'll get a priced project. If we design by what they really want, then in the end, if they spend more than they originally wanted, at least they get what they want. No, and that's the most important thing in the end anyways, is to make sure that we're all done, whatever it is that they're spending, that they get exactly what, or if they don't, then it's their decision to scale back from there, you see? So at least we've been able to design, here is the ultimate project. Better to give them, in my opinion, what they really want and let them say, we can't, we got to start taking back. At least we've done, hey, this is going to cost $2 million to do this. Now we can scale back. As unhappy as that is, better to do that than have never presented them before. You know, worst case scenario, God, I would have found the money if you'd have just told me I could have done blah, blah. So that's the thing is that, you know, is to present them what they really, really like. Then they could understand it, you know, then we say, all right, now how do we build it? Then if we need to, you can value engineer, you can do this, you know, start. And so you kind of a little bit, you know, and the clients will generally pay a fee based on the timing, the project fee, and that goes towards the cost of construction. And then once we get the numbers together, then I say, hey, I know a guy that can help out with financing if that's needed, you know. And sometimes that's just as important because if a client says, hey, we want to do this project because we only have this amount of money, you know, then sometimes you say, all right, if we listen to them, say, hey, maybe that's not what's really the problem here is maybe is if you have it, would you do more? And sometimes they may say, yes. You know, and then that's just as important as the design process because worst case scenario, if you don't listen to them, you know, then later on they say, hey, if you don't, yeah, I would have spent another if I'd have thought of a way to get it, you know, right.
And that's important too because quite often those are the conversations I'll have, which is you know we thought it would be X and it's turning out to be you know 1.5X, and but it's a house that we're going to be in for the next 20 years to raise the kids in, and it's something functionally we really need to, and we don't want to come back. We don't want to do phasing. We don't want to have to do this again in a couple of years. Yep. So let's just get it all done at one time. So,
but the good thing is it's their decision. We've gave them the information. We said, here, now you can understand. I mean, we're doing a large house up north, and you know, and it's 14,000 square feet. And in the beginning, he's like, well, how come it costs so much? And then now that where the mechanics and the plumbers are all in there, and he's seen loads and trucks of lumber, he's like, now I can understand why I have $300,000 worth of lumber, you know, because there's a lot of structure. That's a learning curve for a lot of them as well, that they have no idea. You know, they look on a spreadsheet, 140,000 for plumbing or whatever, you know, well, until you go through and you see and things like that. And that's just as important for any of us is to have these people on these teams. Hey, go see so-and-so over at the plumbing supply shop. You know, they know what they're doing. Don't go to these box stores. You know, who knows who that guy's not even going to be there tomorrow to help you out if you buy it, you know. Go to Ferguson or go to, you know, some of these places that have a representative and any good builder is going to have those connections because they're going to be one of buying them from them as well.
So rehabs in and of themselves have a little bit of a challenge relative to the brand new build because there's some unknowns when you start taking down walls. I guess from luxury construction, maybe including that, what are some of the biggest challenges on projects that you see?
Well, you know, that's a good question because as an example, we did one a year or so ago in Glenview. Very, very nice high-end project. I mean, cabinets were all high-end made. And here we are getting a permit, let's say beginning of the year. And on some of these, and that's probably the biggest problem with some of these remods and things, is that you don't really know, to some extent, what you're dealing with until you're able to see what's behind you. I mean, you can open up corners and things like that, and you can try and get an idea. You know, but some of these walls, you just don't know. If you're talking what to some people may not be a big deal, but to us 3/4 of an inch may be a huge deal because of the cabinetry and everything else, you know. So I may not be able to order those cabinets, which have a 7-month lead time, until my framing is up. Well, there's a good chance by the time my framing is up, I'm going to, in 6 weeks, I'm going to need that stuff. So that's where you end up in rehabs that generally can take longer to get some of the answers. Or if it's build new, I know exactly where I'm going to build that wall, and I can, things like that. So, and that kind of stages down to everything. And that's the more customized the project, the more customized those details are. I might mix 2 different stones, together for a herringbone floor, or whatever the case may be. Making sure that those are all ready in time for that time frame, but you don't know because the complications of rehabbing, and those are probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So as we wrap this up, I guess you think about clients who are thinking about working on a project next year. And it's something they want to get done. They've been thinking about for a while. What are some of the things that they should be thinking about before they have that initial conversation with a contractor builder like yourself?
I would say probably the best 2 recommendations would be whoever you're thinking about, talk to the people they built for, talk to friends, those kind of things, because they'll give you what it's like to work with that person. Because it's not like you're going to buy a pair of pants and a shoes. You're going to deal with this person for 1 hour. And even that, sometimes that's a lot, depending on who you're buying, you're standing in line with. This is something that you can conceptually be with for years to come. And that's in a good way, because maybe we had a client a couple of years ago, we actually built for their son. I remember when I built this house, we did other projects for, he was 9 years old. So many years later, we just built his house because he's having wife and kids. That's, those are the things, that kind of respect. That's what you want to build with your type of clients, because you're giving this kind of advice. So if they can't give you that, if friends, people can't, and you can't see that kind of work, then try and keep going because this is huge money, huge problems, huge things. I've seen it over and over again that that's probably the most important aspect of this, not the price, is the person. Who is going to run that project every day? If you can't communicate with that person, right from the beginning, it's not going to get better once your walls are open and he's got half your money and those kind of things, And then secondly, take the time up front and really think about what's most important. Hey, is it a great kitchen, the space, and these, is it a golf simulator room in the basement or whatever? These things are really driving. So when you're talking to whoever this person is, that he can start to see, all right, this is most important. This is the second most important. This is the third most important, and put those in a nice kind of tertiary sense. All right, so at least we make sure that if we can't do it all, we get the most important things done, or whatever the case may be,
Percent to your first point, I am constantly amazed when chatting with clients when they tell me, oh, there's this contractor we really want to work with, but we can't get a phone call back. And I say to them, and I think to myself, if they're not calling you back now, when you're telling them you want to give them money, how tough is it going to get a call when your roof is
when you
open?
have a problem, right? Exactly. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Challenge. So, I truly appreciate your time, Michael, all your knowledge, sharing that. So, if the remodeling industry certainly is can be the Wild West. So, the things that you talked about today are really, really important for clients who are considering a remodel and making sure they're working with a great contractor like yourself. So, thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you again, man. All right. Thank you.